The year was 2247, and humanity had finally done what dreamers had imagined for centuries. For they had built ships that could travel faster than light itself, and now they stood ready to meet the galaxy. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the viewport of the ESS Unity as it dropped out of hyperspace above Thyra Prime, the sacred world where the Galactic Concord had ruled known space for 40,000 years. And her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, learning every language the translation algorithms could provide, studying every scrap of information humanity had gathered about the 12 ancient species that controlled the galaxy. And now she would speak for all of Earth. The planet below them glowed with soft purple light, and massive orbital stations circled it like rings around a jewel, each one larger than any city humanity had ever built. And Elena felt very small. "Ambassador," said Captain Rodriguez from behind her, "we are being hailed by Concord Traffic Control, and they are directing us to docking platform 7. Elena nodded and straightened her formal uniform. The deep blue fabric representing Earth's oceans and the silver stars on her collar, representing humanity's hope for the future. The Unity was tiny compared to the vessels around them, and Elena watched as a Vethkai cruiser passed overhead, its crystalline hull catching the light of Thyra's twin suns and breaking it into rainbows that danced across the void. When the ship docked and the airlock opened, Elena led her delegation of 12 humans into the station, and they walked through corridors that seemed designed to make visitors feel insignificant, with ceilings that stretched upward beyond sight and walls covered in the histories of civilizations that had risen and fallen. Before humans had learned to make fire, they were met by a protocol officer, a being called a Silith who stood on 4 legs and had scales that shifted color with its emotions. And right now those scales were a dull gray that, Elena's briefing materials said, indicated boredom or contempt. The Concord Assembly will hear your petition in Chamber 17. The Silith said without any greeting or welcome. You will wait until called, and you will speak only when addressed directly. Elena thanked the officer politely and followed as they were led deeper into the station. The waiting room held representatives from other species, seeking audience with the Concord, and Elena noticed that many of them looked worn and tired, as if they had been waiting for a very long time. And some of them looked at the humans with curiosity, while others looked away as if embarrassed to be seen in the same room. After 3 hours of waiting, a chime sounded, and a mechanical voice announced that the representatives from Earth would now be heard. The assembly chamber was vast beyond imagination, and Elena counted representatives from all 12 Concord species arranged in tiered seating that rose up like an amphitheater. And at the center on a raised platform sat the High Council, 5 beings who held more power than any human had ever possessed. High Arbiter Zeloth of the Vethkai presided over the chamber, and his body was made of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. And when he spoke, his voice resonated through the room like music played on glass instruments. The beings from the planet called Earth may present their petition. Elena stepped forward and began the speech she had practiced 1,000 times, speaking of humanity's journey to the stars, their desire for friendship and trade, their hope to learn from the great civilizations of the Concord, and perhaps someday to contribute their own unique perspective. She spoke of human art and music and literature, of human science and philosophy, of the dreams that had driven her species to reach beyond their small world and seek connection with others among the stars. When she finished, there was silence in the chamber, and then something happened that made Elena's blood run cold. The day representatives began to laugh, not all of them, but enough, and the sound echoed through the vast chamber like mockery-given voice. High Arbiter Zeloth raised one crystalline appendage, and the laughter stopped. But the damage had been done. We have reviewed the information your species has provided, Zeloth said. Your civilization is approximately 10,000 years old, and your individual lifespan averages less than 150 years, even with your medical technology. And you have achieved faster than light travel only within the last decade." He paused, and Elena could feel the weight of his judgment pressing down on her. The youngest civilization currently holding membership in the Concord has existed for over 200,000 years, and the average lifespan of their citizens exceeds 4,000 years. And they achieved faster than light travel before your species had developed written language. Elena wanted to speak, but she remembered the protocol officer's warning and held her tongue. "The Concord has discussed your petition and we have reached a decision." Zeloth continued. "Earth will be granted probationary observer status, the classification given to primitive civilizations that have achieved spaceflight, but have not yet demonstrated sufficient advancement for full consideration." A murmur ran through the chamber, and Elena saw some representatives nodding in approval, while others seemed almost disappointed that the humans were being granted anything at all. "Under this status, your representatives may attend Concord sessions, but may not speak unless directly questioned," Zeloth explained. "You may not vote on any matter. You may not access our technology archives or educational systems. And you may not establish trade agreements with member worlds without special dispensation that must be renewed annually." Elena felt her hands trembling, but she kept her face calm. "You may return in 5,000 years to petition for upgraded status," Zeloth concluded. "Perhaps by then your species will have matured enough to contribute something of value to galactic civilization. And perhaps you will have learned patience. For you are infants in a galaxy of ancients, and infants must learn to crawl before they walk." The dismissal was clear, and Elena bowed as protocol demanded before leading her delegation out of the chamber. As they walked back through the endless corridors toward their ship, Elena noticed something she had not seen on their way in. The service workers who cleaned the floors and maintained the stations were watching the humans, and many of them belonged to species she did not recognize from the Concord's official membership. And their eyes held something unexpected, not mockery, not contempt, not indifference. They looked at the humans with hope, one of them, a small being with 4 arms and fur, the color of rust, caught Elena's eye and made a subtle gesture that her translation implant interpreted as solidarity or kinship. Elena stored that moment in her memory and promised herself she would not forget it. As the Unity pulled away from Thyra Prime and prepared for the long journey home, Elena Vasquez made a decision humanity would return in far less than 5,000 years, and when they did, the galaxy would never forget them again. 50 years passed, and the Galactic Concord forgot about the humans almost entirely. For what was half a century to beings who lived for thousands of years, and a small delegation from Earth sat silently in their observer seats at every assembly session, while the ancient powers debated matters they considered far too important for primitive species to understand. But humanity had not been idle. Captain Yusuf Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the ESS Persistence and watched as his ship dropped out of hyperspace near a cluster of asteroids that did not appear on any official Concord map. And he smiled because this was exactly the kind of place he had learned to look for. "Captain, I am detecting life signs inside the 3rd largest asteroid," reported Lieutenant Park from the sensor station. "At least 2,000 individuals of unknown species." Yusuf nodded and opened a communication channel using frequencies that Concord ships never monitored, because they considered them too primitive for any civilization worth noticing. "This is Captain Okonkwo of the Earth vessel Persistence, calling any stations receiving this message. We come in peace, and we mean no harm. We are simply travelers who wish to talk." For a long moment, there was no response, and then a voice came through the speakers. speaking in a language that the translation system struggled to process, because it had been absent from galactic communications for over 300 years. Earth vessel. How did you find us? And why would humans seek out the Kethrani when even speaking our name is forbidden in Concord space? Yusuf had prepared for this question because finding the Kethrani had taken his crew almost 2 years of careful investigation. We found you because we looked, he replied. And we looked because we read the histories that the Concord tried to erase. The stories of a species of builders and engineers who refused to hand over their technology to the Axiom Collective and were nearly destroyed for their defiance. Silence again, and then the voice returned with something different in its tone. Something that might have been wonder. No one has spoken of our history in 3 centuries. For the Concord, declared as enemies of galactic peace, and any species that aids us faces severe punishment. Why would humans risk such consequences? Yusuf smiled, even though the Kethrani could not see him, because 50 years ago, the Concord told humanity that we were too primitive to matter. He said, they told us we were infants who had nothing to contribute. And we have spent every day since then proving them wrong in ways they will never suspect until it is too late. The asteroid opened and the Persistence was guided inside to a hidden city carved from the rock itself, where the Kethrani had survived in exile for generations. And what Yusuf found there would change everything. The Kethrani were master engineers who had developed technologies the Concord had never imagined, born from necessity and desperation. And they were willing to share their knowledge with the humans who had come seeking friendship instead of demanding submission. This was not the first hidden community the Persistence had discovered, and it would not be the last across the galaxy. Human ships operating under the cover of cultural survey missions were making contact with the forgotten and the abandoned. The species the Concord had dismissed or destroyed or simply ignored. The Silith, who served as laborers throughout Concord space, had once been architects who built wonders across 1,000 worlds. Before the Vethkai conquered them and reduced them to servants, and they remembered their old knowledge and were willing to teach it to species who treated them with respect. The dwellers of the deep void lived in the spaces between stars where no other species could survive, exiled long ago for refusing to bow to Concord authority. And they possessed navigation techniques that could cut travel times by factors of 10. Each species humanity contacted received the same offer: partnership based on mutual respect and mutual benefit, with no demands for submission or loyalty, just an invitation to work together toward a future that served everyone back on Earth. Another kind of revolution was taking place. Dr. Amar Chun led a team of scientists working in a facility hidden beneath the mountains of what had once been called Tibet. And they called their work project Prometheus because they were stealing fire from the gods. Human observers at Concord sessions recorded everything they saw, every piece of technology displayed, every scientific principle mentioned in passing. And this information flowed back to Earth, where Amara and her team analyzed it with human ingenuity. The Concord species had stopped innovating millennia ago because they had achieved everything they needed and saw no reason to develop further. But humans came from a world where survival demanded constant adaptation and improvement. Where the Concord saw established technology, humans saw possibilities where the Concord saw finished products. Humans saw starting points within 20 years project. Prometheus had developed shield technology that worked on principles the Concord had never explored. Weapon systems that exploited weaknesses no ancient species had thought to address. And ship designs that combined the best elements of a dozen different civilizations with human creativity. Secretary General Elena Vasquez, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, coordinated everything from Earth's capital. She maintained the fiction of humanity's harmless primitiveness. sending polite diplomatic messages to the Concorde, accepting their dismissive treatment with apparent humility, and never giving any sign that beneath the surface, humanity was building something unprecedented. The Shadow Network grew year by year. Hidden shipyards and asteroid belts produced vessels that never appeared in any registry. Training facilities on distant moons prepared human crews for conflicts they hoped would never come, but knew they must be ready for. Alliance agreements with forgotten species created bonds that would hold firm when tested, and through it all the Concorde noticed nothing, because they had decided 50 years ago that humans were too primitive to matter. And once the ancient powers made a decision, they rarely bothered to reconsider. Elena met with her inner council one evening as she approached her 90th year, and she looked at the holographic display showing their network's reach across the galaxy. "How much longer?" asked Admiral Chun, Amara's younger brother, who commanded Earth's secret fleet. Elena studied the map and thought about all the years of patience and planning, all the sacrifices made by people who would never see the results of their work. "We will be ready when we are needed," she said. "And something tells me we will be needed soon, because empires built on arrogance always fall. And when the Concorde falls, we must be there to catch everyone they drop." She did not know how right she was. In the darkness between galaxies, something was stirring. Something that would test every civilization in known space. And when that test came, the ancient powers would be found wanting, but humanity would be ready. They've spent 50 years preparing for a moment that might never come. And that patience would prove to be their greatest weapon, because the species that learns to wait and plan and build in secret is the species that survives when giants fall. The quiet years were ending. The storm was coming, and humanity would face it not alone, but surrounded by allies who had been forgotten by the galaxy until humans remembered them. The shroud came without warning from the darkness beyond the galaxy's edge. And at first the Concorde scientists did not believe what their instruments were telling them. It was not a fleet or an army or anything that could be fought with weapons. For it was something far worse. A wave of pure entropy that spread across space and consumed everything it touched, turning stars into cold cinders and planets into dust that scattered on solar winds that no longer blew. The first system to fall was a Vethkai mining colony on the outer rim, and the crystalline beings watched in horror as their sensors showed the shroud approaching like a wall of nothing. And then the signals simply stopped. Within days the shroud had consumed 12 more systems and showed no signs of slowing. High Arbiter Zeloth called an emergency session of the Concorde Assembly, and for the first time in centuries, the ancient powers faced a threat they could not dismiss or ignore. The Axiom Collective proposed using concentrated energy weapons to burn through the shroud. But when they tried, the weapons had no effect, passing through the darkness like light through smoke. The Arinthians attempted to communicate with whatever intelligence might be guiding the phenomenon, reaching out with their powerful telepathic abilities. And hundreds of their most gifted minds joined together in a single mental cry across the void. They received an answer. The Arinthian delegation collapsed as one, their minds shattered by contact with something so alien that understanding it drove them to madness. And those who survived could only repeat a single phrase over and over: "It does not hate us. It does not even notice us. We are nothing to it. Nothing at all." Panic spread through the Concorde as the shroud continued its advance. The Vethkai retreated to their homeworld and sealed it behind the most powerful shields their technology could produce, declaring that they would weather the storm alone and that other species must find their own salvation. The Axiom Collective began calculating survival probabilities and determined that certain member species had insufficient value to justify the resources required for their evacuation. And so they transmitted cold messages to dozens of worlds, informing them that they had been designated as acceptable losses. The Silith colonies received their notification first, followed by the outer territories of species who had never held full membership, followed by anyone the Axiom determined was expendable. 9 billion sentient beings were told that they would receive no help, no ships, no protection, and that they should make peace with whatever gods they believed. And Admiral James Nakamura received the reports in the command center of the ESS Resolution, the flagship of Earth's hidden fleet, and he felt cold fury building in his chest. He was 60 years old and had spent his entire adult life preparing for a moment he hoped would never come, training crews and building ships and planning operations that existed only in secret files. And now that moment had arrived. Open a channel to all allied vessels, he ordered, and prepare to broadcast on all frequencies monitored by non-Concord species. His communications officer looked up with concern in her eyes. Admiral, if we break cover now, the Concord will know everything we have built, and we cannot take it back. Nakamura nodded. I know, but there are 9 billion people out there who have just been told they are going to die because the powers that rule this galaxy decided they were not worth saving, and I will not let that stand. He stood before the camera and began to speak. This is Admiral James Nakamura of Earth's United Fleet, calling all species abandoned by the Galactic Concord. I know you have been told that no help is coming. I know you have been told to accept your fate. But I am here to tell you that humanity rejects that verdict. Across the galaxy, beings who had given up hope looked up as the human's voice reached them. 50 years ago, the Concord told humanity that we were too primitive to matter, that we had nothing to contribute to galactic civilization. And maybe they were right about our technology and our lifespan and our place in the great order of things. But they were wrong about what matters most. Ships began emerging from hidden locations throughout the galactic margins. Human vessels and Kethrani cruisers and Silith transports and ships from a dozen other forgotten species, all answering the same call. What matters is that when someone needs help, you help them. What matters is that when someone tells you a life has no value, you prove them wrong. What matters is that we are all in this together, whether the ancient powers admit it or not. The rescue operation began within hours. Commander Priya Sharma led the first wave into the Shroud's path. Her squadron of fast transports racing toward Kethra Station, where 3 million refugees waited for death. The Shroud was close enough that they could see it now. A wall of absolute darkness that swallowed the stars themselves. And Priya felt fear trying to take hold of her heart, but she pushed it down and focused on her mission. All ships begin docking procedures. She ordered, "We have 18 hours before the Shroud reaches the station, and I want every soul on board before it does." Her crews worked without rest, loading refugees onto ships that were never designed to carry so many. And still the darkness crept closer when the last transport finally pulled away from Kethra Station. Priya's ship remained behind to cover the evacuation, and she watched as the Shroud consumed the station where she had spent the last 16 hours saving lives. Her engines were damaged from the constant strain, and she knew she could not escape in time. Commander Sharma to Fleet. Command, she transmitted. The evacuation is complete. 3 million refugees are safe. My ship is unable to achieve escape velocity. Admiral Nakamura's voice came back immediately. Priya, we can send ships back for you. Just hold on. She shook her head even though he could not see her. Negative, Admiral. Any ship that comes back will be caught in the Shroud. The math does not work. But that is all right because the math never mattered as much as the mission. She turned to face the approaching darkness and spoke her final words. Tell them we came for them. Tell them someone cared. Tell them that humanity will always come for those who need us. The transmission ended, and Commander Priya Sharma was gone. But her sacrifice was not in vain. Across dozens of systems, the rescue continued. Human ships and their allies pulling billions of beings from the Shroud's path. And for every world, the Concord abandoned humanity, arrived with open arms when the Shroud finally stopped spreading, having consumed a quarter of known space. The toll was devastating, but it could have been so much worse. 9 billion beings who had been told they were acceptable losses were alive because humanity refused to accept that verdict. The galaxy would never be the same, and the ancient powers who had laughed at humanity 50 years ago now looked upon Earth with something they had never expected to feel: fear. The Great Assembly Chamber on Thyra Prime had never been so crowded, for representatives from every corner of the galaxy had come to witness what promised to be the most significant moment in 40,000 years of galactic history. High Arbiter Zeloth stood at his platform, and his crystalline body pulsed with barely contained anger as he looked down at the human delegation that had once again come before the Concord. But this time, the humans were not alone. Behind Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now over 90 years old but standing straight and proud, stood representatives from the Kethrani and the Silith and the Dwellers of the Deep Void and dozens of other species that had been forgotten or abandoned or dismissed by the ancient powers. And behind them, visible through the great windows of the chamber, hung the ships of the human-led coalition, hundreds of vessels that had appeared from nowhere to announce that the galaxy had changed forever. This emergency session will come to order, Zeloth declared, his voice ringing through the chamber like struck crystal. We are gathered to address the unauthorized actions of the species known as humanity and their violation of Concord law during the recent crisis. A murmur ran through the assembly, and Elena noticed that it was not the unified agreement that once would have followed any statement from the High Arbiter. The humans have been found guilty of multiple violations, Zeloth continued, including the development of prohibited technologies, the formation of alliances with non-member species without Concord approval, and interference in matters beyond their authority as probationary observers. He paused and his light pulsed brighter. The recommended punishment is immediate termination of Earth's observer status and the destruction of all illegally constructed vessels and facilities. Elena stepped forward, and for the first time in 50 years, she did not wait to be addressed. I will speak now, she said. And her voice was not loud, but it carried through the sudden silence like a blade. Zeloth's crystalline form flickered with surprise and outrage. You were not given permission to speak. Human, you are merely an observer here, and you will wait until... I have waited 50 years. Elena interrupted, and the words hung in the air like thunder. I have waited while your Concord decided who deserved to live and who deserved to die. I have waited while your great civilization showed its true nature to the galaxy. And I am done waiting. She walked forward until she stood at the center of the chamber where no probationary observer had ever stood before. You accuse us of developing prohibited technologies, she said. But show me the law that says we could not create shields to protect the helpless or ships to carry the abandoned to safety. She turned to face the assembled representatives. You accuse us of forming alliances without approval. But the species who stand with us were never given the chance to have their voices heard in this chamber, because you decided they were not worth listening to. The Silith representative stepped forward, and his scales blazed with colors that had not been seen in Concord space for generations. I am Keller of the Silith, he declared, and my people have served this Concord for 8,000 years, cleaning your floors and maintaining your stations, and receiving nothing but contempt in return. But the humans offered us partnership and respect, and a chance to remember who we were before you conquered us. A Kethrani stepped up beside him. I am Thessa of the Kethrani, and my people survived for 3 centuries in exile because we would not surrender our knowledge to the Axiom. We were hunted and forgotten and left to die in the darkness between stars. But the humans found us and asked only for friendship. One by one, representatives of the forgotten species stepped forward to speak. And with each testimony, the mood in the chamber shifted as beings who had accepted Concord rule for millennia began to see their government. Through new eyes, Elena raised her hand, and silence fell again. "You asked by what right we acted," she said. "I will tell you by what right we acted. We acted by the right of conscience, by the right of those who refuse to watch others die when we have the power to help, by the right of every sentient being to matter." She turned to face Zeloth directly. During the Shroud Crisis, the Axiom Collective sent messages to 9 billion sentient beings informing them that they had been deemed expendable and that no help would come, she said. "I have those messages. I have the calculations that determined which species were worth saving and which were acceptable losses. And I intend to share them with every being in this galaxy." The Axiom representatives stirred uneasily in their section of the chamber. "I also have evidence that the Vethkai possessed technology that could have slowed the Shroud's advance and saved millions more lives," Elena continued. "But they chose to hoard it for their own protection rather than share it with their supposed allies." Zeloth's light pulsed dangerously. "You dare to accuse us of—" "I dare because it is true," Elena said. "And every species here knows it is true because they watched it happen. They watched the great powers of this galaxy retreat behind their shields and their borders while the universe burned." She turned to address the full assembly one final time. "For 40,000 years this Concord has ruled by one principle, that the strong may do as they wish and the weak must suffer what they must. You called it order. You called it stability. You called it the natural way of things." Her voice rose with the passion of a lifetime spent waiting for this moment. "We call it what it is, tyranny dressed in ancient tradition, arrogance wrapped in the pretense of wisdom, and the end of hope for every species that dreams of something better." The Arinthians attempted to reach into her mind with their telepathy, to silence her before she could say more. But they encountered something unexpected. A wall of static that blocked their abilities completely. Human neural shielding, developed over decades specifically for this moment. "We do not ask to rule you," Elena said as the Arinthians reeled in confusion. "We ask only this, that the galaxy be governed by justice rather than age, by contribution rather than condescension, by the content of character rather than the length of history." She paused and looked around the chamber at faces showing every emotion from fury to hope. "I call for a vote on the dissolution of the Galactic Concord and the formation of a new government based on principles of universal representation and mutual respect." The chamber erupted. It took hours to restore order and more hours to conduct the vote. But when the final count was announced, the result was clear. 7 of the 12 Concord species voted to dissolve the old order. 3 abstained. Only the Vethkai and the Vayaj Axiom voted against the Galactic Concord, which had ruled known space for 40,000 years. Was no more. Elena Vasquez stood in the center of the chamber as the reality of what had just happened settled over the assembly, and she allowed herself one moment of quiet satisfaction. They had called humanity too young, too primitive, too insignificant to matter. They had been wrong, and now the work of building something better could finally begin. 20 years had passed since the fall of the Galactic Concord, and the galaxy had been transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. For the universe that had seemed so fixed and unchangeable had proven to be far more adaptable than the ancient powers ever imagined. First, Speaker Marcus Chun stood at the podium of the Galactic Commonwealth Assembly and looked out at a sight that would have been impossible a generation ago. The chamber held representatives from 47 species. each one with a full vote on matters of galactic importance. And they sat not in hierarchies determined by age or power, but in sections organized alphabetically, because the founders had decided that even seating arrangements should reflect the principle of equality distinguished. Representatives, Marcus began. We gather today to celebrate the centennial of humanity's first contact with galactic civilization. 100 years since Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the old Concorde and was told that her species was too primitive to matter. He paused and smiled. My great-aunt passed away 12 years ago at the age of 108. But before she died, she made me promise to deliver a message to this assembly when this day arrived. He pulled out a small device and Elena's voice filled the chamber. Recorded decades earlier, but still carrying the strength that had shaken empires. If you are hearing this, then we have succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Remember that what we built was never about humanity being better than anyone else. It was about proving that every species has value and every voice deserves to be heard. Keep that promise, and we will have truly changed the galaxy. The recording ended, and Marcus looked out at the assembly with pride. We have kept that promise, he said. And today I want to share what that promise has created. The holographic display behind him lit up with images and statistics. In the past 20 years, the Commonwealth has welcomed 15 new member species. Not through conquest or coercion, but through invitation and partnership. Our borders are open to anyone who shares our values of cooperation and mutual respect. The display shifted to show a massive structure orbiting a distant star, the Compact Station. Our capital was designed and built by engineers from 18 different species working together. The Silith contributed architectural principles they had not practiced in 8,000 years. The Kathrani provided power systems that the old Concorde had tried to suppress. And humans brought the vision that tied everything together. More images followed. Schools where children of different species learned side by side. Hospitals staffed by doctors who specialized in the biology of beings completely unlike themselves. Research stations where scientists collaborated across every barrier that had once divided the galaxy. We have not created a perfect society, Marcus admitted. We still have disputes and disagreements and problems that seem impossible to solve. But we address them together as equals, rather than waiting for ancient powers to hand down judgments from above. He turned to acknowledge a section of the assembly that sat in shadow. Their forms difficult to see. I want to recognize the representatives of the Vethkai Reformation, who have chosen to rejoin galactic society after 2 decades of isolation. Their former empire has not recovered from the shame of the Shroud Crisis. But we welcome those among them who wish to participate in building something new. A crystalline figure rose and bowed in the human style of acknowledgement. A gesture that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago. The Commonwealth accepts the Vethkai Reformation with open arms, Marcus declared. For we do not believe in permanent enemies, only in permanent principles. The assembly chamber filled with applause that crossed every boundary of species in history. Later that day, Marcus visited a memorial that had been built on the hull of Compact Station itself. A wall of names listing every being who had died during the Shroud Crisis and the rescue operations that followed. He stopped at one name in particular, Commander Priya Sharma. ESS Defiance. A woman stood beside him, young and wearing the uniform of the Commonwealth Diplomatic Corps. And she looked at the name with an expression Marcus understood well. She was my grandmother's hero, the woman said. My grandmother was one of the refugees from Kethra Station. She was 7 years old when the human ships came for them. And she never forgot Commander Sharma's final transmission. Marcus nodded. Tell them we came for them, he quoted. Tell them someone cared. The young diplomat smiled. That is why I joined the Corps. I am assigned to the Shepherd Fleet starting next month. The Shepherd Fleet was the Commonwealth's newest initiative. a permanent force dedicated to searching the unexplored regions of the galaxy for species who had not yet been contacted, bringing them not conquest or judgment, but an offer of friendship. What will you tell them when you find them? Marcus asked. The young woman turned to face him. I will tell them what Commander Sharma told my grandmother's people, that they are not alone, that they matter, that someone has come because someone cared enough to look for them. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of pride and hope and gratitude for all the people who had made this moment possible. That is exactly right, he said. On the other side of the galaxy, Admiral James Nakamura sat in a garden on Earth watching the sunset over mountains that had witnessed human history for thousands of years. He was old now, over 80, and his body reminded him of that fact every day. But his mind was still sharp, and his heart was still full of the fire that had driven him to defy the Concord and save 9 billion lives. His granddaughter sat beside him, the same young diplomat who would soon join the Shepherd fleet, and she had come to say goodbye before her departure. Grandfather, can I ask you something? He smiled at her. You can ask me anything. Did we do the right thing? She asked. Taking control of the galaxy, replacing the Concorde with something of our own design. Nakamura was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. We did not take control, he finally said. We changed what control meant. He gestured at the sky where the first stars were becoming visible. The old Concorde believed that power meant deciding who lived and who died, who mattered and who could be forgotten, who deserved a voice and who had to remain silent. And they used that power to maintain their own position for 40,000 years. He turned to face his granddaughter. We believed something different. We believed that power means responsibility, that the strong have an obligation to protect the weak, that every voice deserves to be heard, not because of what it can do for you, but because it exists. He took her hand in his. The Commonwealth is not perfect, and it never will be, but it is built on a foundation of care rather than contempt. And as long as your generation remembers that, then we will have done something truly worthwhile. His granddaughter hugged him and promised to make him proud. That night the Shepherd fleet departed from Compact Station on its first mission, carrying representatives from a dozen species and powered by technology that combined the best of 100 civilizations. Their destination was the unexplored regions beyond the Shroud's devastation, where sensors had detected faint signals that might indicate intelligent life. They did not know what they would find there, but they knew what they would offer. A hand extended in friendship, a promise that no species had to face the universe alone, and the message that had defined humanity's place in galactic civilization since the day Elena Vasquez refused to accept that her people did not matter. Welcome. The message said, you are not alone. Someone came because someone cared, and in the great darkness between stars, that message traveled outward like a light that could never be extinguished, because hope once given cannot be taken back, and kindness once shown echoes forever through the cosmos. The ancient powers had dismissed Earth, but humanity had taken control of something far more important than territory or technology. They had taken control of the galaxy's future, and they had chosen to fill it with hope.